Satanic pics.
When I was in my early 20s, my friend and I were in my boyfriend's basement talking about the paranormal and discussing our views and experiences in that regard. There was a bedroom directly across from where we were sitting, and neither of us liked the vibes coming from that empty room, which is what started the conversation. After a few minutes, I felt something bump the back of the couch hard enough to make me bounce forward a little bit, and then I felt a hand on my shoulder. I didn't take it too seriously. I mean, maybe I was just imagining it, but she said that she felt it too. Whatever, I didn't believe her. But that's when I saw something absolutely horrific from the doorway of that room. I was absolutely certain that I imagined it, and wasn't going to say anything about it, but when she described the thing that I thought that I'd imagined, I was absolutely terrified. At the bottom of the doorway, a little being that I can only say looked a little like the head goblin from the movie Legend with Tom Cruise, except without the huge nose and had a scary face-wide grin full of sharp teeth and greasy-looking black ringlets of hair, sprang up diagonally from the near bottom of that dark doorway. It looked right at me, then it disappeared the same way that it appeared. I couldn't help the gasp that escaped me, but as I said, I was going to keep it to myself, so neither of us questioned my sanity, until she spoke up and said, "I saw it too." Now, I hadn't told her what I saw, anything at all, but she went on to describe everything that I'd just seen, and I sat there speechless and scared. It didn't take long after that to gather up our belongings and zip past that dark doorway and sprint up those stairs as quickly as we could. After which, we never went down there again. When I was 22 years old, second-year uni student, no drink, no drugs, living in the Stoke area of the UK, I rented an old middle terrace house in second year with my then girlfriend and also some friends. It was a creepy and dark house, as it only had windows at the front and back. It had a dingy and damp old basement with lots of old furniture stuffed inside of it, and a black cat would show up at the back door every night meowing, which I befriended and fed in the end. It was also creepy because of the dark and sort of muddy cul-de-sac that served as communal courtyard and car park as well. All of this didn't overly bother me, however, because I grew up in a pretty old house built in the early 1800s anyway. It did, as I later learned, bother my downstairs housemate and his girlfriend, who heard regular footfalls at night in the hallway and adjacent living room, only to find nobody when he'd sneak out to look. I also discovered a year after this event that students who lived there the year prior all believed the house was haunted and were glad to have moved out. So, on to my story. My term time ended 4 weeks after all the other tenants because I had to do clinical placement. This meant that I lived in this large house alone, which I actually really loved. I'm a bit of an introvert and love alone time anyway, so it suited me. It started great too. For 2 weeks I enjoyed it despite the background creepiness. I would just reason any creepiness away, as I still do now. However, after the 2-week mark, I became aware of a creeping sense of dread that I just couldn't rationalize or find cause for. I am not an overly anxious person by any means, and I enjoy my own company, and nothing weird had happened, so it was a bit odd. I began to feel very unwelcome and very much not alone in the house. I felt how a prey animal must feel when they feel eyes on their back. I began to feel so scared that even in the day I would take the 3-mile walk onto campus and sit and work in the library, if not on placement. I would come home and be afraid. I even devised a system for moving around the house at night without ever being in an unlit area. I also did this during the day in the windowless areas too. I had to move from my large comfy room into the smallest bedroom, lock the door and sleep with my back to a wall, often with the light on. I was just inexplicably afraid and I couldn't explain it. On the final day, I had to lock all the windows, turn off all plugs, get some stuff from the basement and lock the back door before I left. I was utterly terrified and felt like I was moving in slow motion the entire time. I went around systematically ensuring a light was always on and that I wasn't in darkness. I had piled all my stuff, backpack and duffel bag. The rest was mercifully packed in my car the day before, at the front door. This is where things got really scary, and I still cannot explain what happened adequately. It was late afternoon and still light outside, but the house was dark. I steeled myself to turn the hallway light off, but the light switch was about 4 meters away from the front door at the foot of the stairs. It was night dark upstairs, normal because no windows and all the doors were shut. But I turned the light off and scurried away without turning my back to the stairs. The daylight still lit the hallway from the open front door, but as I got to the door, the strangest thing happened. My neck hair stood on end. To my shame, if I needed to pee at that time, I think I would have peed myself, but I could feel or see, I can't explain, a black and sort of viscous, shadowy cloud slowly making its way down the stairs towards me. I felt such malevolence, I basically tripped backwards into the street and into daylight, shut the door, and as soon as I did, everything felt fine, like nothing had just happened. I got up immediately and locked the door and posted the key through the letterbox and have never seen that house again. Now, the only way that I can explain the feeling is to liken it to a dementor and ring wraith attack, except there wasn't a caped humanoid figure chasing me. The fear and the dread was indescribable, and I have never since experienced anything like it. To be clear as well, I have and have never had any mental health issues. I was happy and not stressed at the time. I've never taken any drugs or anything, and I even feel crazy and sort of embarrassed relating this story, but if anyone else has had any other experience like this, then I would love to hear it, because it feels pretty lonely having experienced this and really having no one to talk to about it. So, I'm either going crazy or my apartment is actually haunted. At first, I thought that it was just dreams because my first week in the bedroom I heard a female yell with surprise, "What are you doing here?" The next thing that happened is things would go missing for weeks at a time and pop up again in places I'm sure that I checked. Then I started seeing shadows dart across the corner of my vision. This week she let out a scared scream at the foot of my bed, like a surprised gasp. I went back to bed and then this thing slapped the foot of my bed so hard that I felt the mattress dip next to my foot. I'll admit at this point that I was more angry than surprised anymore, so I told whatever it was to cut it out. Big mistake, because before I wasn't sure I was being haunted because it always happened late at night when I was almost asleep. But yesterday, she turned on this toy that I have. It's embarrassing, I know, but she turned it on and I promise that this isn't satire or anything. I got up and turned it off and even put on the button facing the ceiling in case maybe the button got pressed somehow. But as soon as I sat back down, she turned it back on again, and at this point I must admit I was a little bit scared, so I turned it back off and tried to go back to bed. But it turned on again. I threw it away at 4 a.m. to the dumpster on the street. I then tried to go back to bed and I could hear breathing next to my bed. I then got this overwhelming feeling that I was being stared at until about 6 a.m. when I finally had to get up out of bed anyway. I know it's a she because I've heard her voice and it's always been scared like I shouldn't be here. I live in an army barracks and suicide is actually pretty common. My theory is some girl took her life in the room and she doesn't know that she's dead or something. I didn't believe in ghosts before coming here, but I've taken talking to her gently before I do things. I'll tell her that I'm about to turn on some music or that she has the place to herself when I leave for work. I'm honestly hoping that she just thinks that I'm her roommate or something because obviously this was her space and she isn't tracking that she's dead or something. She has never been violent or aggressive with me, but she has a habit of doing these things at the dead of night and terrifying me. I need advice as to what to do with this because she is very real and she made a believer out of me, but I would be lying if I said that she doesn't scare me. This happened when my best friend was 17 and a half and I was 17 in 1996. My best friend Chrissy and I are both smaller females. She's 5'4" and at the time weighed 110 pounds, but was a soccer player, very athletic and strong. I am 5'7" and at the time I weighed about 125 pounds. We are both blue-eyed blondes and were often asked if we were sisters or cousins. Now, there's a large reservoir on the outskirts of her town surrounded by a beautiful public park. We figured that we'd be fine to walk around in the park because lots of people go hiking there after all. I had gotten some really good quality weed and we were looking forward to finding a peaceful place to smoke some out in nature. I had my pipe ready in my pocket and we were pretty stoked. We chose to go out on a Saturday. It was a beautiful sunny day and there were not many people there either. We parked her car by the reservoir in the mostly vacant lot that had 2 other cars in it. We didn't see anybody when we got there either. We walked around the water for a bit and then chose a trail to go up. It was about 80 degrees out and we were sweating, but we had some water in my small day pack. As we got about a quarter mile or so into the trail, I started having a bit of a weird feeling. I looked at her and quietly asked, "Hey, do you feel like something is off here? Everything's really quiet." Where there were usually crickets chirping and frogs singing, it was absolutely silent. She looked at me and said, "Yeah, I think so." And then we heard some crackling of leaves about 60 feet behind us and a bit to the left. We didn't see anybody at the time, so we continued forward. We were getting pretty nervous and we both heard the crackling again, this time a little bit closer. We still did not see anyone though. Each time we would continue forward, we would hear footsteps a little bit more behind us, and at this point, I thought that we were being stalked. There was a turn off to the left which led to a clearing by a large rock about maybe 12 feet high with a large sturdy rope anchored on it to climb up to the top. It was a part of a steep hillside off the cliff and the rope to climb it was anchored to the ground as well, so no one could really move it or anything. So I told her, "We need to get up to that rock now and we need high ground." She nodded and went up first with me right behind her. We flew up that rock, clinging to the rope tightly and going as fast as we could. When we reached the top, we turned around to see an older man, probably about 45, with a slighter build, wearing a jacket, jeans, and glasses, coming into the clearing. He was about 20 feet away, and he looked at us with a cold, vacant expression that I'll never forget. I got goosebumps looking at him, and I shouted, "Hi, will you please leave us alone? We're trying to have some privacy here." He made no response, and with a blank expression slowly started walking towards the rope which led to the top of the rock. My friend at this point was really scared and asked, "What do we do?" I saw a large rock about 8 foot and almost square to my right, so I grabbed it. I was surprised at how heavy it was, but my adrenaline was going, so I lifted it pretty easily. I told her, "Look around for the biggest rocks you can find, quickly. Move them next to us. Hold the biggest one. If that guy tries to come up, we throw them at him and hit him as hard as we can. Aim for his head." Fortunately, there was a pile of sort of sizable rocks behind us to the left, like someone had made a ring to hold a fire on the top of the rock there and then move them away or whatever. She brought a few over and held a large one herself. My friend and I stood close to the edge of the rock, holding our makeshift weapons. I looked down to the base of the rock where the guy was considering the rope. He looked up at us again with very cold blue eyes and no expression. Then he reached his hand for the rope. I shouted loudly, "Do not come up here. If you try to come up here, you're going to get really hurt. We're aiming for your head with these rocks, so get away from us." I held the rock close to my chest so that he could see it. My friend was next to me doing the same thing, and we had a pile of more rocks as well. He blinked his eyes and cocked his head a little bit, then released his hand from the rope and silently backed away. He backed to the edge of the clearing, backed through the brush, still watching us and walking backwards. And then we heard his crunching footsteps go back through the woods until we couldn't hear him anymore. We stayed on the rock for about another 20 minutes, maybe a bit more, watching and waiting. There was no other way to access the rock, except for the steep hillside covered with poison oak, so we didn't think that he'd try it. And plus, we'd be able to hear him if he did anyway. After we didn't hear anything for like 20 minutes, we decided to make a break for her car. We threw several rocks down the road and mine hit the dirt with a particularly satisfying thud. Chrissy went first down while I was watching, just in case he came back. When I was scaling down the rock, she was holding a rock, getting ready to throw it full force if he returned. Fortunately, he didn't. We each grabbed the largest rock that we could carry, put a few smaller ones in our pockets for good measure, and then we headed back to her car on the trail, very carefully and quietly. The crickets were chirping again, so we felt that he had left, but we were still extremely cautious. We did make it back to her car with that incident, and we quickly left. And that was the last time that I've ever hiked in that park. So about 3 years ago, I was living with my mum for about a year after a relationship breakdown with an ex. I hadn't had anything like this happen to me before, but I have had quite a few paranormal experiences. Some backstory first. So, since the age of about 10, I used to see what I would call a woman periodically throughout my childhood and into my teens. I would always see her out of the corner of my eye, peering around walls or door frames, and she would always just watch me. When I was younger, it used to freak me out, but I spoke to my mum about it, and she said that it's probably just someone watching over me, so that's what I believed for a very, very long time. Especially as this woman had never made me feel truly scared, threatened, or done anything besides poke its head around a corner and just sort of watch me. No one else ever saw her, and as soon as I'd turn my head to try and see her, she would always disappear. I'd turn away again, and sure enough, a head would reappear out of the corner of my eye again. This happened over the course of about 12 years with no real routine. Sometimes I would see her twice in a week. Then I would see her for 6 months. Then I'd see her like maybe once in a month, and then not for a year or so. I don't really remember, but it was always the same. Just watching, I guess. It's worth noting too that this happened in multiple houses and places where I've lived. Anyway, flash forward to 2021, height of the pandemic, and I'd split up from my then girlfriend and moved back to my mum's for about a year. I don't remember how long I'd been there at that time that this happened, but it sure as heck made me get my own place a lot quicker. So, like most people, I tend to sleep on my front with one arm under my pillow, one leg bent up, as this has always been more comfortable for me. I've never slept on my back at all, and I've never woken up sleeping on my back either, always on my front side. Anyway, one night I go to sleep as normal. I put a YouTube video on in the background, lights off, sleeping on my front. My bedroom door was always shut for privacy when suddenly I just wake up. Instantly, too, I can tell that something is wrong because I'm laying on my back, half propped up on my pillows, almost as if I'd fallen asleep reading a book or on my phone or something. My arms were at my side, and the first thing that I saw was my bedroom door was wide open. Now, the layout of the house was sort of split into two. You would walk in the front door and either turn left or right. To the left immediately was the living room with a connecting hallway leading to my mum's bedroom. To the right would have the bathroom directly in front of you, kitchen on the right, and my bedroom directly opposite the kitchen on the left. My bed faced the doorway and allowed me to see into the hallway and kitchen when fully open. We lived in a block of flats, apartments for my American friends, so there was a bit of light coming through the frosted glass in the front door from the communal stairwell, which slightly illuminated the hallway and the kitchen. Now, as I've just woken up and I'm already confused as to why I'm awake and why my bedroom door is open, as my eyes adjust, which only took a few seconds given the light, I could see a figure standing in my doorway with its back to the kitchen. Now, as soon as I looked at it, it moved to the right, as if heading towards the front door in the living room. Immediately, I started to feel my heart rate rise because did I really just see something? As I'm sat there processing everything that's happening and the off feeling that I had, this thing slowly comes back into view and is just standing directly in my doorway watching me. Now, I don't know how I knew, but my brain instantly made the connection to what I'd seen growing up, and I knew that this was the same thing that I'd seen watching me when I was younger, except now I felt scared. I felt threatened. I couldn't focus on what the body of this woman or thing looked like because all I could focus on was the dark yellow eyes that it had. Now, given that it was dark and I usually wear glasses as I have very short-sighted vision, so the fact that I could even see the color of its eyes really brought me to attention. I have never felt primal fear before this moment. I've heard and read stories about people saying that they experienced primal fear and just assumed that it was just another level of scared. I've never been so wrong though. Honestly, I felt like prey. I felt like I was about to die. That's when I started crying, silently though. I couldn't make any noise really, and it just wasn't coming out, I guess, and I couldn't move either. People I've told this experience to say that it was sleep paralysis, but I know for a fact that it wasn't. But as I'm trying to shout out for my mum, nothing but air comes out. This thing starts like walking or floating. I'm not even sure, but it made its way into my room. It made the 10-foot frame from the doorway to my bed, and then moved around to the far side of my bed. It was a king-size one, and I always slept on the right side, nearest the door. I must have had some wrappers or something on the floor because I could hear it rustling the plastic or stepping on whatever was on the floor. I'm still pretty much paralyzed and crying with fear at this point. This thing just stood next to the left side of my bed and just watched me. Now, the reason that I know that this wasn't sleep paralysis was because I managed to roll onto my right side, facing away from whatever was now standing next to my bed, and I laid there for maybe 3 to 5 minutes. It felt much longer than that at the time, but that's pretty much what I gauged before I blacked out. People wake up from sleep paralysis. They don't black out, right? So that's another thing. That was the last thing that I remember before waking up like usual on my side, bedroom door closed and daylight coming through my curtains. Everything felt normal. Now, obviously I had trouble sleeping for about 2 weeks after this, terrified about seeing that woman again, but just as soon as I started to forget about it and started sleeping regularly again, I was randomly awoken again one night. Now this time was different because I woke up on my front in the recovery position, how I would normally sleep. I was in a deep sleep and had been asleep for hours, but my immediate reaction as soon as I opened my eyes was to look over my shoulder behind me, and I nearly jumped out of my skin when I saw a face inches from mine shoot back into the darkness. I didn't know what to do, so I just sort of rolled over, went back to sleep because I just didn't want to deal with whatever this was. I don't know if it was the same thing that walked into my room a week or two previously, but whatever it was made my natural instincts kick in. Wake up, look for danger. I must have felt whatever it was right next to me, and as soon as I saw it, it just backed away into the darkness. I haven't seen the demon woman or had anything similar happen since then. I'm hoping that whoever or whatever has been watching me since I was 10, I'm now 25 by the way, got as close as it wanted to me and has decided in the end to just leave me alone. It's been 2 years roughly since this happened, so I'm praying that whatever it was stays away. So, I had a pretty creepy experience with my friends in the woods this past weekend. For some context, me and my friends like to be in the forestry part of my state and just sort of hang out there. It's more peaceful to us and cooler looking, so anyway, when we got out there, we normally go down this one road that's pretty out of the way from everything. No houses on it and no street lights, and it stretches for miles with thick woods on either side. This one night, it was just me and my one friend who has never been down this road before, so I decided to show it to him. We start driving down it, and I'm pretty far into it when I see a reflection of what looks like a license plate of a car, so I'm sort of confused because cars are never on this road, especially not at nighttime. So I decided to go a little bit past it, and it turns out to be practically a brand new Mustang on the side of the road. So I find it strange and turn around and go home. The following weekend comes around and me and my friends who frequent the road go down it, and the Mustang is there again, but this time it's in a different spot, with a white towel sticking out of the window. We find it odd and check it out to make sure that no one needs help or anything like that, and the inside looks new as well. So we brush it off but keep it in the back of our minds at this point. The next day we go back and it's again in a different spot but still has the white towel sticking out of the window. So this time I take a picture of the plates and try to run them, but notice that it's parked in the only spot on the road where there's no service, which is really weird, so we start driving back towards home to get a connection, and I run on the plates but nothing really comes up with an internet search. We decided to stake out the car and see if someone comes to get it. So that night rolls around and we're sitting in my friend's car trying to look at this Mustang that's about 100 feet in front of us when me and my friend decided to get out and go take a look with our flashlights. We walk up to the car, but there's really nothing weird about it. We don't hear anything. There's like no bugs or anything either. We decided to walk into this little clearing in the woods that I knew about and sort of take a look around. As we're standing there yelling hello and we like your Mustang, we start to hear whispers, it seems, and see movement. And then all of a sudden me and my friend think we hear our friends talking, so at that we start to run back to the car and we hear footsteps behind us following us. We get back and they said that they weren't talking that loud, and from that far away we wouldn't be able to hear anything anyway. My friend driving decides to drive up to the side of the Mustang to where his lights are shining on the driver's side door, and my one friend jokingly starts to video this. We don't see anything, and so in the end we just head back. But when we check back on the video, you can clearly see a person just standing there in the woods. And there's another person that you can't clearly make out, but they're behind a tree. I don't know what's going on with that Mustang, and I don't know what those people are doing down there, but the whole thing seems really weird. It's been about 10 years since this happened, but I still remember things pretty clearly. I should note too that this is told from my perspective, and I wish that I could get my mother's perspective on it as well. She just doesn't remember the events as well as I do, I guess, but For context, I lived in a mid-sized city in the southern United States, where the main thing to do at that time was to go to the mall. Sure, we had movie theaters and a couple of bowling alleys, but besides that, there really wasn't much to the city. My mum worked at a department store located in the mall though, and having nothing better to do, I would regularly go and sit in the break room while she worked. It gave me a reason to get out of the house, and if I wanted to, I was allowed to walk around the mall or get something to snack on in the food court. Honestly though, I was shy and preferred to just stay cooped up in the break room, playing video games on my Nintendo 3DS. My mum's co-workers were generally very sweet to me and frequently popped in to say hello or just to check on me during the downtime. If I was lucky enough to go with my mum on weekends, I could usually convince my mum to pick up my friend as well. We were actually dating, but since we were both goth girls, I didn't want that to get out, just to go along with us. Going to the mall meant that I was free from doing any chores at home, and it was a cheap way to sneak a secret date in every now and then. My girlfriend, though, never really liked staying in the break room with me. She always wanted to walk around the mall. I should note too that she really enjoyed taking walks, so it wasn't out of the ordinary to want to do this at the mall as well. I just didn't like walking as much as she did, I guess, so I tried to weasel my way out of it whenever I could. I could usually convince her to just walk over to a nearby store and look around, or to just go grab something from the food court rather than walking, but I noticed pretty quickly that she wasn't trying to actually get me to walk around. She just didn't want to be in the break room for whatever reason. Now, my girlfriend was more perceptive to things than I was, and I assumed that she just didn't like the ambience of the break room for some reason. For a little while, I let it go too, but eventually I got frustrated and asked directly what was really bothering her about the break room. I thought she was going to tell me that it was just too cramped, or the lights randomly cutting off made her uneasy, the things that bothered me about it too, but no. What she told me was that she heard things in the ceiling, like someone was walking around in there. I had learned from my mother that there was a room in the ceiling, but it wasn't for walking around in, it was for maintenance. Most of the stuff in there was just wiring and insulation, but technically someone could be up there. So I told my girlfriend this and said that it was likely an employee up there to try and fix stuff. She said that that was fine, but she didn't really like it and still preferred walking around or sitting in the food court. I understood her discomfort and I wanted to help, so I agreed. We had a really good relationship in the sense of communication, and though I got frustrated, I wanted to make sure that she felt comfortable. Later that day, I mentioned what my girlfriend had told me and asked what they were fixing in the ceiling. My mum, though, just looked distressed and said that they hadn't been up there fixing anything that day, but she wanted me to see something. My mum took me into the receiving room of the department store, which was just a room off in the back filled with boxes and random junk the store was going to put out for sale or whatever. But the layout of this room was sort of like an L shape. One part of the L was used for receiving, but the other part was the way into the ceiling. I should clarify for this next part that to get into the ceiling, the store would have to call for the mall's maintenance team. They didn't have a ladder or anything on hand to climb up in there, as it would have been a safety hazard. The only thing that this particular area had was a hatch that led into the ceiling, and that was it. So, needless to say, I was horrified to see what appeared to be claw marks leading up the wall to the hatch. I still remember the way that they looked too, brown gashes that had been dug into the concrete wall of the receiving room. I asked my mum if it was a prank, but she told me that this wasn't the first time that it had happened, and she had had no way of knowing that I would even ask about it. According to her, these weird carvings had shown up several times over the course of a few months. Each time, the store would call in the mall security and maintenance teams, who would clean the wall up and then go into the ceiling to investigate. Nothing had ever come out from their searches, though, and they eventually gave up dealing with the marks and the issue. The only explanation mall security could give was that It was likely a homeless individual who had made their way into the ceiling by sheer willpower and happened to be very good at hiding during the searches. I stopped staying at the mall with my mum after that, and anytime I wanted my girlfriend to come over, we found somewhere else to go during the day. Sometimes she'd just come over to my house and we'd watch TV or whatever, but I didn't feel safe going back to the break room after that. I knew that nothing had happened up until that point, but I just didn't want to risk it, honestly.